Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 8th of November 2012. Welcome to the afternoon edition of UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studio. Today my guest is Patrick Henningsen, and we're going to be taking a look, an in-depth look, at just what is happening in Britain's political establishment. And of course the baseline for this is what is happening to do with the abuse of children and the activities of paedophiles who quite clearly have not only come into Parliament itself, but are working through the elites and also through our public services. So this is a very serious programme today. We're also going to be hearing a previous interview that we did with Robert Greene. There's been great controversy over the Anne and Hollie Greig abuse case for some months. UK Column Live feels that it's time to really set out the evidence relating to the abuse of Down syndrome girl Hollie Greig and looking at how that is impacted on the establishment and indeed how the BBC has reacted. But before we start off with some introductory comments and opening words from Patrick, I'm just going to say a very big thank you to all of the TNS radio team in Ireland. Our recent visit to Ireland was absolutely wonderful. It was great to meet the TNS team, and we also enjoyed the strong Scottish contingent who'd come over for discussions. What a wonderful situation where we're now starting to see those campaigning for the truth and an end to this terrible political and criminal corruption which has now infected not only England, Wales and Scotland, but also, of course, Ireland, south of the border. So I'm going to say thank you very much for that weekend. Thank you for the special equipment you've provided, and also, of course, thank you for the pints of Guinness, which then went down extremely well. So starting off, Patrick, the first shot I decided to put up was a little look at what was being said on the web, and I've got a screenshot here from Google. It's quite extraordinary because obviously the material on Jimmy Savile goes on and on, but we've got some very interesting headlines here. The top of this page, which was the first page, was Jimmy with affectionate greetings from Charles. Give my love to your ladies in Scotland. I think that's relating to a member of the royal family, if I remember correctly. So it goes down through. It's obviously got people talking about their experiences, but down at the bottom of the page, as I can show it, we've got David Elstein, who's calling for a breakup of BBC News in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal. So this is quite a, let me just assist you with that, if we can. Should be online now. Okay. David Elstein is calling for a breakup of BBC News in wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal. And this is where life is getting very interesting because we're starting to see something darker and deeper going on. That there's now enough of a trauma inside the BBC for people to be suggesting not only the BBC needs to come under slimmer and tighter control by the government, but here's somebody saying that we should break up BBC News. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'll just comment on the Prince Charles reference there. It's known that, according to Princess Diana, that Jimmy Savile was a mentor to Prince Charles. And of course, they spent a lot of time together. There was a very close relationship for a very long period of time. So one wonders how long Prince Charles and Camilla would be spending on the other side of the world, visiting places like Papua New Guinea and other countries over in the Pacific Rim before he has to return back to Britain, and also comment on what exactly was his relationship with Jimmy Savile.
Yeah. I'm just going to move the mic up a bit. I suspect that it's a bit of a sound issue here. We'll bring it central as well, see what that does. See whether I get a thumbs up from the technical department this afternoon. It's obviously going to be a good show because whenever we've got a good topic and it's going to cause an impact, we start to get the little technical gremlins coming in. So your suggestion is that the royal family is away on the other side of the world while it's a bit hot here?
I think Charles would be scared to death to have to be in front of a camera to recount what exactly was his relationship with Jimmy Savile, and it just makes everyone wonder even more how deeply this particular gruesome individual's penetration was into the elite power structure of Great Britain.
Yeah.
And also, you talked about the breakup of BBC News. Well, this is a perfect storm. If you look at, if this story really breaks and becomes sort of threatening the actual structure of the BBC, it's a perfect storm for calls, and there were calls over the past years to privatize parts of the BBC.
Yes.
And BBC has also, which a lot of public aren't aware of, have sold off some of its assets over the last decade. They've sold off various assets, production assets. They've sold their TV license, which we'll talk about later, to collection agencies like Capita.
Right.
But certainly there are a lot of benefits to privatizing or breaking up the BBC.
Yeah. So really the Savile affair has not only thrown the spotlight on the terrible subject of child abuse, but it's now also forcing us to actually look at what the BBC is, what it's supposed to do, and in fact what it has been doing. I'll just bring up this slide here, which is a shot of your website, and you're making a very interesting comment. So this is Patrick Henningsen on 21st Century Wire, and the little headline here is the BBC, it's the Vatican and the mafia all rolled into one. Yeah, that's pretty crunchy.
This is an article by Peter Steary, who himself is ex-ITV years ago, and he's really giving an inside look into the self-referential ivory tower world of the BBC. You know, if you look at the BBC, their role is to explain things to the public, to explain science, nature, gardening, news, and they're not doing very well, I would think, explaining institutional pedophilia to the public. And in fact, I think they're doing a lot to suppress the conversation, and they will hold an investigation to see how well they do and how well they perform investigating themselves, which is kind of a ridiculous thing if you look at the scale of this problem within the BBC itself. But there are comparisons to the BBC and the Vatican. The Vatican also investigated itself and came up with very little. In fact, did so well dragging their heels, the Vatican did, that a lot of lawsuits and things that came against them were being held up in courts and expired in some cases, where victims had no redress as a result. And also the mafia aspect of the BBC is something that really should be coming out right now, because we have a public broadcaster who is suppressing information about something that is in the public interest, that's an institutional problem, and they're still coming and with Gestapo, really that's how the TV license collectors work, trying to shake you down for 130 or 140 pounds a year to get you to pay for programs that you don't want.
Yeah, or programs which are increasingly violent, sexual, and particularly sexualized in content where children are concerned, bad language. So this stuff is being sold as if we want it, but ultimately we're having to pay for it. And
they're protecting their cash gravy train at all cost. And it's great if you're an executive at the BBC, great if you're in charge of vision at the BBC. They have all these titles for all these different departments. And some of these presenters, particularly we're talking about even some of the retired footballers that are no more knowledgeable about sports than the guy at the pub. But they're on 20,000 a week.
Well, I won't take you too far away from your site, but I think this is quite a pertinent little picture here. This was the front page of the UK column. It was back in June. Here is a gentleman who was being paid £47,000, BBC, working for the Trust for 28 days' work a year. Chairman of Barclays Bank, which had obviously got a little bit of a tarnished reputation. So this is the type of person that the BBC feels they can take business and programming advice. What other sort of advice might this international banker have been providing the BBC? We don't know. But he's going to be paid £47,000 of taxpayers' money for 28 days' work a year. It's an insult, isn't it?
These are the elite bureaucratic class, and what they are is they're the sort of top operators, and they're paid very handsomely to get things done. And this gentleman, Marcus Agius, obviously has to get things done for Barclays and for other financial interests, and to get things done within the BBC structure. Yeah. That's why he's being paid the big money. But then you can go further up the BBC chain to the Director General. Mark Thompson claims he didn't know anything about Jimmy Savile's activities, and everyone's doing what politicians have done so well in the last 30 years with this new word called deniability. And it seems that all these people in these public-funded organizations are more concerned about protecting their very lucrative long-term careers than they are about interests that are at the heart of public concern.
Yeah, we don't want to get to the bottom of people abusing children on our premises. It's plausible is the other word that goes with that, isn't it? Plausible deniability. So we've got these very, very wealthy, powerful people tied in at the top of BBC. We've got, of course, an arch Tory, Chris Patten, who's now running the BBC. So, you know, is there any form of independent view there between him and Cameron, or somebody like Ken Clarke, for example? I don't think so.
Well, you know, Chris Patten, head of the BBC Trust, I believe. The word trust is the operative word here. Why doesn't any member of the public sit on the BBC Trust? Why does a public broadcaster not air any programs that aren't produced by their highly paid and perfectly groomed production teams? This is a big question that I think it's right now is a great time to start asking these questions, because this is an overinflated blimp of an organization that's being forced down to earth right now by its own mistakes, really. Right,
but we are going to, I think, put a word of caution out here in that as we lead people through this story, we've got individuals calling for BBC News to be axed. We've got the government already saying, well, of course, it's this very bloated bureaucratic management structure of the BBC which has allowed all of the Savile abuse to go on. So we need to slim it down, we need to get greater control in, and we've already got effectively the British government running one of the biggest propaganda machines in the world. And what they're really saying, or what I see, correct me if you don't agree, what I see is that they're trying to get that control in even tighter.
Yeah, and I think even if they privatize the BBC, it would be the same sort of shell game or accounting sleight of hand that we saw with other state assets in the past, where these same assets that are supposedly privatized will be coming back for bailouts or other sort of government funding mechanisms to increase their bottom line. But the actual control mechanism still remains the same from the state to the organization.
Yeah. So we've got this vast organisation, £3 billion, well, it's more than that, as we're going to see in a minute, but £3 billion plus. The rich, the famous, wealthy, pop stars, media people, but they're also mixing with politicians in this environment. And that's one of the things that was coming through from Ben Fellows, was the fact that when you got close to these people, what you see is this very unhealthy mix of people who are supposed to be protecting the public interest, particularly if they're an MP in Westminster, and these people who are now admitting that they've had a particularly liberal, hedonistic lifestyle where anything goes.
Yeah, I mean that casting couch, as it were, not just for actors and aspiring celebrities, but the casting couch is also in effect for anybody who wants to be an executive or wants to move up the production side and have a sort of fast track of that, which Peter Steary talked about his experience with ITV, his casting couch, in our article, which I encourage people to go read because it's quite interesting. But yeah, I think you know, why we devolve so much of our power and so much of our personal finance to keep these sort of inflated personalities who aren't, some of them, and I'm not the only one who's going to say this, a lot of people out there are going to agree with me, some of the presenters on the BBC are not very talented even. No. But they've been put in these positions for whatever reason, and I'm sure you can speculate on many of those reasons, but we're paying the bill for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if we dig into the BBC a little bit more, this is a shot of BBC Worldwide's webpage, and I'm going to freely admit that until I went having a look at the BBC, I didn't really realise the extent of this. But we've got BBC as we all know it in the country, paid for out of BBC licence payers' money, £3 billion plus worth. And then on the side, we've got a private company, BBC Worldwide. It has grown off the back of the taxpayers' money. It's now £1.1 billion worth of global media organisation. And who is this organisation accountable to? Well, presumably its own board members. But something that's quite remarkable is that we, the licence payers that in UK, are not allowed to watch the information this company's putting forward. It's an extraordinary situation. As you may be able to see on the first, on this web capture that we've got here, they're boasting about their financial results for 2010-11. Headline sales, 1.158 billion, which is up 7.8%, and a headline profit of 160 million, up 10.3%. Headline sales refers to gross revenue including discontinued operations and including the group's share of revenues from joint ventures. Headline profit refers to operating profit before specific items. So this is absolutely commercial material running here. Yeah. And most people are totally unaware that this is really what the BBC is about. 1 minute you deal with it and it's claiming it doesn't have any money to do anything, and the licence payers support it. And then if you move across a bit, we see this huge global organisation who's in control of it. But they've got some quite interesting comments. Our vision is to be a leading global entertainment company rooted in BBC values. That doesn't give me a warm and comfortable feeling, because I think with Jimmy Savile we're beginning to see what some of the basic BBC values are. Offering world-class content that resonates with local audiences. Our growth strategy is designed to deliver that vision by building on the assets that set us apart, the BBC brand and our portfolio of distinctive, high-quality consumer brands and content. In the year ahead, we'll continue to invest, etc. John Smith, Chief Executive, BBC Worldwide. Yeah. So they're pretty confident people, and they're pretty confident that they've grown out of a BBC that we should be admiring.
The BBC brand rooted in BBC values, and we're starting to see exactly what the BBC values are in the last few months. Yeah. With the Jimmy Savile cesspit. Yeah, that's what they're exporting through BBC Worldwide, these same values. You know, we can't even clean our own house at home. The BBC is having a hard time remembering. Mark Thompson, Director General, has changed his story 3 times. He's now CEO of the New York Times. He was very conveniently shipped offshore very quickly, and the Director of Programming, who also was covering for him or not covering for him, was promoted to Director General. Yeah. That's the BBC in a nutshell. Savile affair, the Newsnight affair, it's a microcosm of the organization.
Yeah. And of course, it's also giving us a snapshot of media across the country and the reaction to the fact we are now starting to see the evidence. They've always existed, but the evidence for paedophile rings, not just working at dirty old man in a raincoat level, which of course is what we have been sold year on year on year. We're now starting to see that the abuse of children is actually an elitist game, where we're talking a lot of money for people who can have access to these children. But if we just take a little look through BBC Worldwide, I've got a couple of more facts here which people may not be aware of. So we got the comment about dividends. Total returns to the BBC, our parent and sole shareholder, increased by 8.6% to 181.9 million. supporting its development of world-class content. This includes dividends of 76.4 in relation to 2010-11 performance. So what they're saying is that here we are now as a over £1 billion company, but don't worry because we're pushing money back into the BBC, so everything's okay. And just so that we really know what we're dealing, Mr. Smith is receiving as chief executive an annual salary of £440,000 and the chief financial officer a mere £250,000. But if they're struggling to get by on that, there's help at hand because the chief executive is eligible to receive a core bonus of up to 55% of base pay. So if you can't get by on £440,000 per year, you can have another £200,000 just to help you get through Tesco's, presumably. Performance conditions are weighted 25% against individual objectives, with 75% determined by the performance of BBC Worldwide against stretching profit targets. Plus, these guys can use the BBC pension pot, which would seem to me to be funded by the licence payer.
Well, it seems to me if you're lucky enough to land an executive position at the BBC, it's definitely well worth securing your job at all costs.
Yeah.
When you're talking about this sort of level of money and pay and so forth in a public broadcaster, it's going to feed corruption, which means that this model really is out of date. The BBC are anything but competitive. It's probably very difficult to get an audit trail on a lot of a budget that size.
Flowers.
Fruit and flowers.
Fruit and flowers.
This is one
Yeah.
you'd probably want to do a freedom of information request about, because to see how much the BBC spent on fruit and flowers, and if you work in the industry, you know what we're talking about with that particular statistic.
A lot of things could be labelled as fruit and flowers, I think.
Yeah, a lot of things could be delivered by courier to parties on Friday night
Probably
as fruit and flowers.
Probably because this programme is going out live, we will now find that it will take more than 40 days for the BBC to find that information, so they'll be unable to provide it. But it is an interesting question. We can just do a comparison, and then we can just reflect a bit on where this whole situation of the BBC and the scandal and politics comes. But we've looked at BBC Worldwide, a commercial operation, £1 billion plus. Chief executive on £440,000, just like to reinforce that. And if we have a look at how the BBC actually deals with its licence payers, we get a rather different view. So if I just call it up here, so that we know how much money the BBC is handling, their performance for 2010-11, gross income has increased to 3.2 billion. Gross income is the value of licences issued in the period, so well done everybody who's paying a TV licence. Revocations, deletions and cancellations have risen to 158 million. So the BBC, sitting on the backs of the general public at the moment, is taking 3.2 billion. And then they've got some other comments. It says the BBC's licence fee collection showed excellent performance in 2010-11, delivering over 140,000 additional licences and 77 million more than 2009-10. That's revenue. Over the last 2 years, the BBC has faced the toughest environment for collecting the licence fee since it took responsibility for collection in 1991. And then the killer, because it says why. It says that household growth is low compared to the long-run trend experienced until 2008, and customers find it increasingly hard to pay as household budgets are squeezed by prices increasing faster than incomes. In this environment, the BBC has improved its processes to maintain evasion at 5.2% in 2010-11, whilst improving its relationship with customers by changing the tone of many of our communications and identifying and alerting processes that lead to complaints. As a result, complaints have fallen by 19%. So what they're recognising is that at the moment, people are finding it increasingly difficult to feed themselves, never mind pay for a TV licence, But the BBC, by being even more forceful and draconian, is managing to force more money out of people, and they're congratulating themselves.
Yeah, they say there are improvements in their communications. The BBC, if we just want to also reiterate that TV license is a trademark of the BBC. So they've been able to license that trademark out, and other companies have been able to operate under the TV license banner. And also we see the ads on billboards, which are basically intimidation, threatening ads, also ads that are encouraging people, in some cases in the past, to snitch on their neighbors, and threatening you with a jail sentence, huge fines, and people coming to your door. People who coming to your door, who if you actually look at what is going on there, they're actually people from limited companies like Capita, and they're soliciting money. And they're obtaining money by deception in some cases. And there's a number of legal actions have been taken against the TV license collection agencies. But if you ask them who they work for, and you ask too many questions to the TV license collector, you'll find that they'll just kind of like snicker off and run away. So
Capita, I think, also run complaints for the BBC. When you call in, you don't speak to the BBC. I think you speak to Capita.
Yeah, they've outsourced quite a bit to Capita, and there's a couple of other countries. I went to the TV license website recently, and I noticed it said that they've only, Capita started as a contractor in 2012, according to their website, which I think is inaccurate. So if whoever they're in charge of that might look at that. But they're essentially, you know, again, extorting funds to make programs that people don't want. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So
meanwhile, the most incredible stuff is actually going on inside the BBC. I think actually Capita also has held board meetings inside Deutsche Bank, which is quite interesting because we're actually starting to see this overseas control of the BBC sliding in. Who is controlling the BBC? Is the government doing it, or are the banks doing it? Perhaps that's why Mr. Agius is being paid £47,000, 28 days' work, to what? Keep an eye on the BBC and whether they're doing what the banks want.
Well, they're selling off bits and pieces, little by little, of the BBC, keeping the BBC brand. So again, this is that bigger trend that's going all across Great Britain, which is private companies masquerading as public bodies or public agencies. And so when the TV license comes to your door, when they threaten you, and when they intimidate you, in many cases, they're masquerading as the BBC.
Yeah.
Essentially, if you ask to show their identification, what company do you work for, they get very nervous sometimes, because therein lies the problem. This isn't a totally transparent system. It's very opaque on some of the levels of contractor and subcontractor.
Yeah.
And the BBC claim that it's for cost efficiency that they're doing this. That's why they've sold this off. That's why they're selling that off. These are all contracts. It's a labyrinth. It's an accounting labyrinth, and I'm sure that's why you have some of these banking executives on boards.
Well, we're going to go straight into the nasty stuff, and the first picture we're going to call up is, of course, of Mr. Savile himself, but we've chosen to put William Hague in. So let's have a look at the happy pair. It's incredible, isn't it? This man was able to do what he was doing. We are led to believe, I think, already by mainstream media, that he was sort of doing it on his own. He was somehow able to get into Broadmoor. He was into Stoke Mandeville Hospital. Well, of course, people were helping him. And he's got a track record of being with politicians as well as the royal family. But you've chosen William Hague as this first shot.
Yeah, I think it was really important to highlight this photograph, which was taken, to me, a few years before possibly during, but a few years before the Waterhouse inquiry over the North Wales child abuse homes scandal,
right?
Where a paedophile ring was operating at that care home and in Wrexham, and an inquiry was held. William Hague was part of that inquiry. He was Welsh Secretary at the time.
Right.
But here you have Sir Jimmy Savile. We have to be correct about his title. Sir Jimmy Savile hobnobbing with just about everybody, from royalty to politicians to celebrities and also children.
Yeah, and of course somebody like this coming close to the royalty or coming close to senior politicians is instantly going to be under surveillance by special branch and the police in their protection role. And I just find it, well, unbelievable, literally unbelievable for somebody to say that the police force in Britain did not know what this man was really into. And then you say, if they did know that, how is it they weren't warning members of Parliament like William Hague, just watch what you're doing with this man because he's got a checkered background? Why did that not happen?
Well, the truth is that many police in this country did know what Jimmy Savile was up to, but in some cases, witness they couldn't prosecute or they didn't pursue certain allegations because of the persons where the allegations were coming from. Sometimes underage children, some children in experimental government homes with mental conditions, supposedly, and also just because look at the North Wales care home. You've got Steve Mesham, who actually was on the Newsnight program last week, who was supposed to name, according to Ian Overton from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and also Michael Crick, all tweeting before the show last Friday that if all goes well, a top Tory person's going to be named. Well, Steve Mesham certainly named him. Michael Crick spoke to the person who is alleged to have abused Steve Mesham and others, and also 2 other independent witnesses from that inquiry named that same person. The police wrote 2 of those off as fantasy, and so again, we have this whole parade of inquiries and various... It's a
smokescreen, isn't it? We're dividing it up. We're saying, well, of course, this is liberalism back in the early 70s. We've got different inquiries. We can have inquiry into the... So I'm being a bit passionate on this, but my mind is it's absolute divide and rule. We've got a mishmash of inquiries going on so that each one can be shut down individually and connections between these rings are not brought out into the public.
And that's one of the biggest crimes, particularly of the North Wales care home scandal, is that these people come forward. Now this issue has come back into the public forefront in 2012, some 15, 16 years later, and these witnesses have to relive the horror of the abuse that they suffered at the hands of very powerful people. And everyone knows the names of these perpetrators. The police know their names. Michael Crick knows their names. Ian Overton knows their names. Newsnight knows their names. The police know their names. Many other investigators know their names, but yet they can't be mentioned or they can't be investigated. At the very least, for a much lower offense, you would be arrested by the police and questioned. But that is not even happening. And so to me, the system is broken down. You have the press with their hands tied with libel.
Well, if we say that the press with their hands tied, we know, talking to journalists, excuse me, that the journalists are saying there's 2 main problems. Their budgets are being cut, so they're not allowed out of their offices. They would get out there and do proper investigative journalism, but the newspapers are saying to them, we don't have the money for you to do that. What they expect them to do is to actually sit in front of a computer and take the information second-hand off the internet.
Off Reuters and AP and so.
And the other thing which we know from the mainstream papers, because people inside are telling us, is that when they've even got evidence of these very, very disturbing stories that need fully breaking into the public domain, the legal teams in the papers say, oh no, you can't do that. And why do the legal teams do this? Because, of course, the legal teams are being lent on by the judiciary and the legal mafia that are behind the rings anyway. We've had the case where Christopher Booker, as one mainstream journalist with the Telegraph, even ended up with judges effectively threatening him because he dared to start reporting in detail what was happening to the abuse of children within the care system. So we're seeing that there's this tight control.
Yeah, this pervasive through all these different public institutions, and the judiciary is a key one, because they're able to to create an impasse or a block at a certain point in a process. And that's a very important key position to be in if you don't want something to happen, or you don't want something to move forward. But you know, who's got money to really do investigations? You mentioned newspapers who are dependent on advertising and subscription revenue. There's one institution in this country that's got a lot of money and it's not dependent on any advertising, and they're doing no investigation. So I have to really put that out to anybody who's a journalist for the BBC. You've got the resources to really break this thing open.
I'm just going to correct you there because I believe that the BBC at the moment is working on a tremendous documentary. They've sent teams out all over the country talking to residents in areas that have suffered flooding or other problems by extreme weather. So the BBC, which can't properly investigate the abuse of children in care, it can't investigate the dirt inside its own organisation, but it can, at this critical time, send out teams to local villages over UK to look at flooding problems where one of the BBC's scientific experts is going to be explaining how the changes in the world weather have caused local flooding.
I would say they've allocated a few million.
A few million to that.
Could that be, maybe they want to promote some idea out of that, maybe climate change, possibly?
I think we're going to be told that my local village had flooding, and it was very interesting. In late summer, we have flooding worse than a winter, and now the BBC's come along and they've got the expert and the team to investigate it. But can we get the BBC to investigate the abuse of children in care, the abuse of children through social services?
No. The money's not there, the resources aren't there.
No, okay. We just put up this slide. We've shown it before, and I think we'll keep showing it. The top two gentlemen are both paedophiles, Jamie Rennie, sentenced up in Scotland, and Matthew Byrne. Matthew Byrne, a particularly dangerous man. I'm not even going to describe what he did to some young ladies. But the key thing about these two individuals is that they had been selected and trained as future leaders by the political charity Common Purpose. Matthew Byrne, sitting on the Common Purpose Advisory Board in Merseyside, was sharing that position with senior members of the local NHS, universities, and indeed the police. And of course the key thing about the political charity Common Purpose is not only do they meet behind closed doors under Chatham House rules, but they're very, very keen on getting into schools and colleges in order to spread their political agenda amongst young people, children and students. And of course we know from Sheffield alone that Common Purpose trainers have been going in amongst young children with absolutely no form of CRB checks. And the reason that we flag this up is that these two very dangerous individuals are just two of the people that have surfaced amongst the Common Purpose networks. But of course in the lower photograph on the screen, you might have trouble making it out, but we've got a very, very intriguing picture of David Cameron and Mr. Heseltine actually meeting. And I think there's a pat on the back for Mr. Cameron from this odious gentleman, Matthew Byrne. And again, it's very, very interesting because you say, did these people really have no idea what was going on? And also, since Cameron himself is a supporter of Common Purpose, how can Mr. Cameron support an organisation which has been neglecting safety checks with children and running secretive networks where it's now proven paedophiles are able to operate with impunity?
Well, it's even more dangerous because when an organization puts itself under the veil of secrecy, in terms of it's not transparent to the public, membership doesn't have to be declared, then a man like this, Matthew Byrne, in an organization like that is a very dangerous thing.
And the other thing, of course, that we're seeing in these training programs is the use of applied behavioural psychology. Now, I know many people call us, and we're very happy to agree with them, that applied behavioural psychology can be put to very good use in therapy, assisting people and helping them. But we've got to be realistic about this and say that NLP, for example, neuro-linguistic programming, in the hands of a paedophile means that essentially the children could be abused and more or less go home not even remembering what was done to them. So it's a tool. We know that the tool can be put to good use, but when we start to mix very, very sophisticated mind control in with the training of young children and students, we've got a very dangerous mix.
Let me just quickly comment on common purpose. This is a social engineering trend we're seeing a lot in the last decade especially, is this focus on training. So here we have, just on the news this morning, I saw a woman from a very large national charity who are spending, I don't know, £1 million or something pounds to train people on how to deal with people who have this particular health affliction or disease. And you see this a lot, where charities might be a good client for common purpose. So charities willing to train its top people,
yeah.
for £5,000 for a weekend, or I don't know how long the training course is with common purpose. But instead of society taking its resources and allocating it to dealing with the root of the problem,
yeah.
Look at cancer and a lot of other things that we deal with on a daily basis. No, they're going to spend the money on training people how to cope with the expansion of this disease or this health problem. Yeah. And so this is what Britain seems to be excelling at through groups like Common Purpose, and I don't see a real payoff at the end for the public.
No, well, on the contrary. But one of the themes that we'll be coming on to is the fact that we've got politicians who have not only believe in an incredibly liberal agenda, they are fully prepared to peddle that agenda to ensure that it spreads through the rest of society. So at the moment, something is wrong with many MPs because they simply are not picking up on the danger to children and young people. One man who has spoken out, watching the time, is Tom Watson MP. And of course, he stood up in Parliament and warned about connections between paedophile rings and politicians, senior politicians. And my goodness, that sent a jolt around the country for the majority of the public who are simply unaware of what's going on.
Well, Tom Watson very bravely stood up in Parliament and made a statement of fact in that the evidence that was used to convict Peter Wrighton within that cache of evidence was two names, one top Tory person and not Peter Morrison, another name.
Yeah.
So here we have, there's another name that's known by the authorities and was never followed up on and is not being put out into the public sphere.
Yeah.
So again, thank you to Tom Watson for bringing up the subject, but actually what's going to happen as a result? This is the big question.
Well, of course, I think one of the things that happened with Mr. Watson is that when he made this statement, and maybe he needed a bit of publicity as well, but he did stand up and he made the statement. What he didn't expect is for his email box to then be flooded with statements and information from people saying, this is not one or two people, these are massive rings. And I'm happy to state here on camera that my belief is that we are dealing with massive rings which are operating through Parliament, through the elitist system and the judiciary, but also through the public sector. So far from protecting children, the public services are actually helping to procure children. That's how serious I think it is. But this man wrote to David Cameron.
Yes, he's wrote an open letter to David Cameron thanking the Prime Minister, rightly thanking the Prime Minister in this particular instance for announcing that there's going to be an inquiry coming up in the future. So, but it's still tomorrow, it's not today. So how far in advance are we looking at this inquiry? Could it be in April?
Yeah.
Could it be next fall? We don't know. We do know that this is if it's an organized institutional problem that pervades government, public services, the child care industry itself, the police, the judiciary, is it not urgent?
Well, it should be a recall of Parliament. If Parliament is now being smeared and accused to this extent that we've got paedophiles sitting in the Houses of Parliament, surely that is a case to recall Parliament, and Parliament makes a decision that there is going to be an absolutely full, in-depth investigation where the police are given free rein.
If you look at what happened in Belgium, where they dragged their heels on the Marc Dutroux case, there was almost a revolution in that country. I think if the leadership in Britain is seen to be protecting and covering such a sick crime as paedophilia within its own institutions and leadership, I believe that's a national security issue.
Of course.
Because this affects international diplomacy, it affects Britain's standing from a diplomatic point of view, and it's a major handicap.
Okay.
But if the countries and the leadership is seen to be acting on it quickly and decisively and getting some results, that can work in Britain's favor. Britain can then be a leader in dealing with this sort of corruption. If
they want to get it out. Now, with an eye on the clock, what we're going to do is, for the next hour, we're going to listen to an interview between myself and Robert Green. Robert is talking about the evidence for the fact that a young girl at the time, a Down syndrome girl, Hollie Greig, was abused by a paedophile ring. And what this interview really shows is the depth that you have to go to in order to get the authorities to do something. In fact, having said that, we still haven't got the proper meaning across, because we have Jimmy Savile, where hundreds of people are coming forward with evidence, but we have many, many other cases throughout Britain where young children and young teenagers are coming forward talking of abuse. And it almost does not matter how much evidence is put on the table. The authorities, including the police, including the Crown Prosecution Service, including members of Parliament, refuse to act. So, against the background that there has been some criticism over the internet about the Hollie Greig case, please listen to the next section and hear Robert describing what the evidence is for Hollie's abuse. And he's then going to be telling us about the BBC's reaction. In fact, how BBC Scotland did exactly what happened with Newsnight. An investigation and a programme on the abuse of Hollie Greig was pulled, with BBC staff being threatened. We'll join you again at the end of this next section. At the end of the story, we're going to have a look now about you being put through the courts and ultimately put in prison.
Yes.
The gentleman responsible, Sheriff Principal Bowen.
Yes, indeed.
So tell us about this court case.
Yes, very briefly. I was initially arrested and charged over 2 years ago at the start of my prospective election campaign for the general election in 2010. And the thing dragged on and on and on, and as a result I lost the opportunity of having a jury trial, which is what I wanted. I'd be very happy to go before.
You've been campaigning to get the truth out about Hollie's abuse.
Yes.
So what were you actually charged with?
It was with harassing. It was the harassing and causing distress to people. It's breach of the peace, actually, but it has a slightly different meaning in Scotland than it does in the rest of the UK.
Right. And in simple terms, what were you doing to be charged?
What I was doing was, having discovered the complete failure of the police to investigate the case, and we'll go into that in more detail in a little while. Yeah. I felt that an injustice had been done, and that because of the nature of the crimes and the police's failure to investigate, people were at risk, other people were at risk from the perpetrators.
They were still at large.
Yeah, still at large. So I decided, I had to think very carefully about this, that I would send out leaflets to people in the area where the abuses are alleged to take place, to warn people about the danger that presents itself as a public duty because of the police's failings to do their duty. Yeah. And for that reason, I was charged with breach of the peace.
Right, and the scene is Aberdeen. We're talking about the Aberdeen area.
Yes, it is Aberdeen, yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, we can bring up on screen the sentencing comments by Sheriff Principal Bowen. There's some significance in the title of the text here, because you haven't so far managed to get a full transcript of the hearing.
No, I haven't. There are many witnesses, of course, to the hearing, and there's an audio, and there's also, should be an accurate transcript. But immediately afterwards, I complained to the judicial people in Scotland about two comments that the sheriff made that I deemed to be racist.
Right.
When the transcript arrived, those two comments were missing. At the present time, we're looking to find out who altered an official court document.
Okay.
Which is serious in itself.
We'll just come back to that point. What we'll do is just focus in on the first paragraph of the thing here, which I'll read. The text is taken straight from the document, so that's why the font is a little bit tired. It's sad to see someone of your age finding yourself in this position. Nevertheless, it's completely unacceptable in a society governed by the rule of law for an individual to take matters into their own hands. It is totally unacceptable to name people as being involved with paedophilia and murder. Making allegations of paedophilia and murder in this day and age is a very serious matter indeed. It is completely despicable. You carried on this campaign regardless of what others told, having done little research into the basic facts. Only someone stupid or obsessed with their own importance would do what you have done. I suspect of you it is the latter. Yes. Well, that's a very hard-hitting comment by Sheriff Bowen, and he says that basically you've done little research. What's your answer to that?
Well, the answer to that is we will see some of the research, the documents that I worked on, and this was totally ignored by the sheriff. And in fact, the sheriff would know that when my house was raided in England after I'd been arrested and being held in custody in February 2010 in Aberdeen, copious amounts, huge amounts of documents were taken from my home, most of it relating directly to this case.
Right.
It's all the documents I was researching, and to say that I haven't done little research is absolutely ludicrous, and it was not at all supported by the facts and the evidence that we presented.
Right, I believe there was some key evidence that you'd actually written a transcript. This would be known as contemporaneous notes that you'd taken while Hollie was being interviewed by the police on one occasion. There was two notebooks, and what happened to those?
That is correct. Hollie was, of course, initially interviewed by the police in 2000 when she first made the initial allegations. But I came into the case sort of late 2008, early 2009. And on the 8th of September 2009, Grampian Police came again to give a formal interview to Hollie Greig. It was Detective Constable Lisa Evans who came. I was present at the interview. I heard everything that went on, the 3.5 hours of the most horrendous ordeals that poor Hollie had to go through. And I took notes. I had a little notebook with me, taking notes of what was going on, which I did in my very brief scrawl and hardly to decipher for anyone else. So I took that. After I'd left from the investigation, I went home and then transposed everything while my mind was fresh into a blue exercise book. Right. So that I could refer to it later, as I regard as very important evidence.
So done within 24 hours, that forms contemporaneous notes, which certainly under English law, those are now formal documents.
As the trial progressed, and I have to say to everyone, no inventory was ever made of all the things that were taken from my home. Nothing. They took lots of information belonging to clients of mine, and I had no idea of the extent, but it was an awful lot. But the important thing is that those particular documents obviously were missing as well. And as the trial progressed, it was discovered that the Crown had not produced either of the two books, which were quite important to my defence. After my solicitor had pressed, suddenly the first very rough notebook was actually produced under pressure. But the more detailed book, which is even more important, the blue exercise book, to this day has never been...
Right, so just as with Hillsborough in this case, what we're seeing is evidence disappearing at the hands of the police.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So that was that particular element. I think we may talk about the sheriff as well, if I may. Yeah. Sheriff Principal Bowen, as I say, I should have had a jury. in the end, my fate was to be decided by a single sheriff. After I was convicted, which happened on the 24th of January, and I went for sentence on the 17th of February, it was discovered that Sheriff Principal Bowen was a business associate for 10 years to one of the cited defence witnesses who refused to come before cross-examination in the court.
Right.
Sheriff Bowen supported that witness, so they didn't have to come to court, even though it was a very, very key witness. And fundamentally, we discovered that he'd had this relationship with this particular
So
witness.
this is a blatant
Yes,
conflict of interest.
In fact, they were together for 10 years, and they actually resigned within 24 hours of each other.
Right.
Now, quite clearly, justice not only has to be done, but has to be seen to be done. And I think that concept applies to Scotland as well. Now, I think everybody should be aware that any sheriff in Scotland could have taken that case. So as it was a very high-profile case, would you have not thought that the Scottish justice system would want to see as far as possible that justice was being done in an open way, considering the worldwide interest in the case?
Yeah, so on that basis, we would expect Sheriff Bowen to have recused himself.
Yes, he should have recused himself, and of course he should have been appointed in the first place by a sheriff who had no connection with any of the key witnesses. That was the only way which justice could possibly have been seen to be done.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. So
Right.
one may draw one's own conclusions for that.
But what we're basically saying is that the trial was not fair. At best was not fair, and at worst was part of a cover-up.
Yes, I think that's quite fair. I don't think anybody would look at it reasonably and have reason to dispute that. That is my view. You may think otherwise, but I think that is just on the basis, forget the Hollie Greig case, forget about me, you would have thought a sheriff would have been brought in with no connection with any of the witnesses. They had hundreds to choose from. Why choose this particular individual?
Yeah, and of course the fact that a transcript of the case, an accurate transcript of the case, is still not come forward.
Nor an audio. There's been audio as well, so we're waiting to get that, and we hope it hasn't been tampered with. But we've found throughout this case, we're dealing with a regime that can and does tamper with formal public evidence in many ways. There are other, as Brian knows, other complex parts to do with the case, which we're not going to dwell on today, but we have a whole chain of important documents that would incriminate the authorities, embarrass or incriminate them, going missing, suddenly disappearing.
Yeah.
And they're public documents, and some quite clearly been tampered with, as this has.
Right, okay. What else can we say about this case? You had a lot of support,
Yes.
and people in the establishment in Scotland were also watching very carefully. The
Yes.
Scottish Law Reporter, which is an excellent website, blog, I think
Yes,
is the right
it is, yes.
description, has been following this case very, very closely,
Yes.
and with very deep connections into the Scottish establishment and the law fraternity in particular. They have constantly been saying that they support what you're doing, they support the case, and they produce some of the initial information, I believe, about the Scottish establishment spending a minimum of £500,000
Yes.
to shut you up.
That's right. That's indeed. They've been very supportive. And if I may just go back to the Sheriff's comments, he was handed 200 letters of support from professionals just before he pronounced sentence upon me. Quite clearly, he had no time to read. The time meant that he did not read them, and obviously took absolutely no notice. And from the paragraph that you've read, he portrayed me as some kind of maverick who just wanted to make a name for himself, where there couldn't be further from the truth. All I've ever asked for is the police to conduct a proper investigation based on the evidence provided. It's as simple as that.
And of course this brings us now straight into this business of what is the evidence. This is something which we know very well in the UK column. We can print articles, we can print witness statements or excerpts from witness statements, but people are always demanding more and more evidence.
Yes, they are, because they've only got my word for a lot of things. You know, I could be, I'm not making it up, but I could be if you haven't seen it. But that is the purpose of the programme today, largely, to actually show people things. We've been following the case very loyally throughout, but now they can see for themselves the documentary evidence that I've been working on throughout. It's not a question of whether I do like Hollie and Marion or Anne or whatever. It's not a question of that. The hard evidence is there, expert witness evidence.
And if Hollie can be abused, other children can be abused.
Of course,
we're going to say are being abused.
Well, of course they can. I mean, the basis to all this is that it's quite clear from the evidence that Hollie has suffered sexual abuse. It's also quite clear from the evidence that Hollie is a truthful and competent witness. Hollie has named the people who abused her. Nothing has been done, despite the fact that obviously Hollie, there's no reason to disbelieve Hollie because of expert witness evidence. And also we have to go along with because of the type of crimes that Hollie has suffered from, and it's confirmed she has suffered from those crimes, the people who perpetrate those crimes are likely to continue to be a threat to public order and to most vulnerable members of society. That is the position I held, and that's the position I hold now.
And I'm going to say to viewers that one of the things that we can say with confidence is that we, the UK column, are getting reports from policemen and women who are working within their respective police forces, and they know perfectly well that serious crimes of sexual abuse, trafficking of children and young people are being covered up by senior colleagues.
Yes.
And some of them have become so distressed about this and the fact that they can't get the wider media to take these stories on, that they're coming to UK column and alternative media sources in order to get the truth out.
Yes.
So something's bubbling under the surface.
Well, I think it is, and I think the basis of this, as you probably deduced from what I've been saying, is there is a number of people, and not just in Scotland, who seem to have an allegiance to each other and not an allegiance to their duty under the law and to decency and humanity. And that is where the problem lies.
I'm going to say, like yourself, a few years ago, I'd never read or seen anything in any detail about cases involving the abuse of children. So my learning curve has been quite steep. But one of the things that a police officer said to me in the early days was, Brian, you have to understand that when people are involved in the sexual abuse of children, it's like a big club. It doesn't matter what your social status is. You can be a judge and you may be doing your thing next to somebody who's a road sweeper. And those men will absolutely defend each other to the hilt, because of course if one goes down and spills the bean, they all go down. So I think one of the weaknesses with the article that we see with the Times, which we just had a look at, is the fact that there's a tendency to say that the abuse of children is something that's only done by people at the lower end of the spectrum. It's dirty old men in raincoats.
Yes.
Whereas the truth is that it's actually a rich person's sport, because in many cases they're buying the children.
Yes, indeed. And
we also have to say, sadly, the ratio of men to women is roughly 50-50, 51-49.
It certainly is. I mean, the problem, as you've outlined it there, is that people in senior positions of trust and authority, they're not the only ones, but they are certainly the ones who are using their position and their influence to pervert and obstruct the course of justice. That is my view, and I think it is substantiated by a lot of the cases that you're hearing about, and certainly the case of the Hollie Greig case.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got a minute and a half to go, so we just come in, we'll start to have a look at some of the factual evidence, and I call up this one. This is a Criminal Investigation Division document, dated the 24th of September 2003. Now I'm going to say to viewers and listeners this evening that we've taken a decision on what we can put up on screen, and whilst we're going to be quite frank with some information, we don't think it's fair to the family to put up whole documents, which of course are talking about extremely delicate and personal things. Indeed. But on the other hand, in order to get out evidence, we've got to show that we're not dealing in hearsay, we're dealing in the factual letters and documents.
Indeed.
So what can you tell us about this one here? I'll just call up a bit of the detailed text from it.
Yes.
But in very blunt terms, this excerpt from the police document is saying that it was evident that Hollie was sexually abused, including penetration. But there was no medical evidence of how, by whom, or over what period of time. The investigating officer at the time and others who have conducted further inquiries since were all of the opinion that Hollie had been the victim of penetrative sexual abuse at some point in the past. And as can be seen from the statement, she named her father, so that was an allegation at that stage, Dennis Mackey, as the perpetrator. So basically, we are showing documents here. Okay, sorry.
No, I mean, you might as well just forget about the timer now.
Well, no.
Forget about it, because you're going to have to, you know, you have to...
I completely lost track.
Yeah, I know, but you have to say, well, we're going into...
All right.
So I'm going to have to edit it now anyway. So you might as well just keep talking, and then we'll just I don't know what... You know.
Well, should we keep going on this, then you can sort of signal to us.
Right, well, just something for you, Mike. If you're going to cut in like that, just speak and say, because...
I was trying to direct your attention to the clock so that you can actually do something about it. I didn't want to speak and say.
Okay, well, okay.
So,
right.
So you know, just do another 20 minutes and...
Yeah, okay, we'll...
All right.
Carry
on.
Okay, so shall I come back? I'll come back to starting to talk about this screen then.
You might as well just keep talking about it.
Yes, we'll go on to the this page 2, I think.
Right,
now.
well, okay. Right. So we've got the investigating officer at the time, and we've got others. Now, we're not talking just about one officer. We've got the officer at the time and others who've conducted further inquiry, but we'll come on to that little expression, were all of the opinion that Hollie had been sexually abused, seriously sexually abused. And it then says, although further inquiries carried out, there was never a sufficiency of corroborative evidence to make prosecution of any person viable. Yes. So the first thing we're going to concentrate on is, was Hollie abused? And the statement here is very clear that she absolutely was.
Yes.
If we take a little more from that excerpt, it goes on to say the evidence available gives little indication of timescales involved, but based on the evidence of similar cases, it's reasonably safe to say that interfamilial sex abuse usually commences when the victim is quite young. So the background is there.
Yes.
They're also saying the position, as far as I can determine it, is that there seems a sufficiency of evidence to accept, on the balance of probability, that Hollie Mackey was sexually abused, and that this has included penetration. Yes. So there's no messing around by what the police are actually saying here.
Nope.
They are saying that Hollie Greig was abused.
Yes.
It included penetration.
Sure.
And it is not just one officer that's saying this, it's a series of officers. If we just take a little bit more on this, that not only has she been abused, but officers who've dealt with Hollie have taken the view she was a truthful witness to the best of her ability, an entirely innocent victim. She appears to be distressed by what's happened to her, and if it's correct that her father was responsible, that is an allegation, this would have been particularly traumatic for such a vulnerable person. So at no stage in this police documentation is there any doubt about whether...
None whatsoever.
Hollie was abused.
None whatsoever. It's quite clear there. And I think it's very important for people to know at this stage is that when there's been talk about the number of people who have been alleged to have done this, none of these people are actually questioned by the police. Now, who knows?
Right. How can you tell us that people were not questioned by police, and how can we say to our audience today this is factually correct?
Well, I'll go back to the time when I was present, which was the 8th of September 2009. DC Evans was brought before the court as a prosecution witness against me, and when questioned by my senior counsel Andy Lamb QC, she admitted that not one person amongst the people that Hollie had given details of, quite categorical details of, over 3.5 hours had never been questioned. Right. Now, I will say amongst those people were 4 people named in a document that we are going to show a little bit later, an expert witness statement. Also, 2 of those named were people in professional positions where they had direct access to children, and of the 4 that I've just mentioned, 1 had been involved in a sexual offence prior, nothing to do with Hollie, prior to Hollie making her allegations.
Right.
So even this person was not questioned.
Right.
There can be no rational or
Right.
logical reason.
And to put the documentary evidence on the table
Yes.
that people were not investigated by the police.
Not questioned.
We need the full transcript.
Of course.
And the recording of the hearing.
Of course.
But we can say, of course, that in the courtroom were numerous members of the public
Yes.
who also heard
Yes.
the testimony from
Yes.
that police lady.
And I mean, the police often talk about lack of corroborative evidence, but if they're not going to question people, some of those people, goodness gracious, quite possible that one of them say, well, under pressure, might say, yes, I've done it, you know, yes, it is true. How do they know till they've spoken to them?
Yeah. And this is the pattern that we are actually seeing at the moment with Thames Valley Police,
Yes.
who are simply failing to investigate the abuses at Oxford and Cherwell Valley
Yes.
College.
And it seemed the same with South Yorkshire with the Times story. That
Indeed.
Offenders have been named and nothing happens.
Yeah. So we're not actually pointing out anything amazingly unusual here. We're simply giving it in a bit more detail. So I've got another document here, which is, I believe, a solicitor's letter that was sent to the Chief Constable of Grampian Police.
Yes, former Chief Constable Andrew Brown. He's been replaced since, but
right. So if we take an excerpt from that letter, the solicitor was saying, "I'm enclosing a copy report from Jack Boyle and Eva Harding, both of whom have carried out assessments on Hollie. You will see that both are of the view that Hollie is telling the truth and has been sexually abused."
Yes.
So the two names here, Jack Boyle and Eva Harding, these are psychiatrists or...
Yes,
or
they are experts. Jack Boyle, both highly respected. Jack Boyle, as I understand, is one of the most respected medical figures in his field in Scotland.
Right.
So impeccable people with impeccable credentials.
Right, and these are two totally independent
yes.
experts.
In fact, they've been asked not by Anne, but by the solicitor who looks after the problems with legal problems with disabled people, the organisation Enable, and their solicitor Nicola Smith.
Right.
So this doesn't come directly from Anne. This has come from a solicitor acting for disabled people.
Right. So we're already starting to see that in correspondence that's going back and forth between the police and other agencies, we're seeing a common theme, which is simply stating over and over again that Hollie is the victim of abuse.
Of course, and the specialist solicitor is hardly going to come to people who have not got impeccable credentials in order to get an assessment, is she? She's going to their experience in the field, so they go to the people they can trust. And those include Dr. Eva Harding and Dr. Jack Boyle.
Right, okay. So if we move on then, we're actually having a look. This is the opening of Dr. Boyle's report. He's saying some very pertinent things. The research indicates clearly that children with learning difficulties are probably more likely to be sexually abused than their peers. So he's flagging up here that a Down syndrome child is even more vulnerable than a normal child. One explanation is that children with learning difficulties often lack the vocabulary to disclose their abuse and are even more easily intimidated to keep it a secret than other children. Hollie, if mother is an accurate historian, has no history of mental illness. So we've heard she's credible and trustworthy and reliable. And here, there is no documentation regarding any psychosis or paranoia.
Correct.
The reports I received regarding her educational progress indicate that other than her learning difficulties, she is a well-adjusted girl. So it also says that former teachers have said in their opinion, she wouldn't make up a story.
Yes.
So this is pretty strong stuff.
Yes.
And if we take out some of the key paragraphs here, he goes on to say it's important to appreciate that Hollie, despite her learning difficulties, is fully aware of the distinction between appropriate and inappropriate touching. And there's some background information which may be relevant. It's noted that Greg, and this I believe is her brother, that Greg has a conviction for masturbating in a public place. I'm sorry if viewers find some of this difficult to deal with, but this is what these cases are about, and this is what we need to protect children about. So her brother, who features in this case, had got a previous conviction.
Yes.
This psychologically an extremely serious matter, although from a a criminal point of view, it may not quite have the same significance, but I think the inference there is that there is somebody within the family network close to Hollie who already had at that time a criminal record for sexually related offences.
Yes, I'm not quite sure of how far the case went, but there's certainly it occurred and it was investigated, that's sure. So there was a record of that, that's for sure, yes.
Right. And we'll just go on a little bit more from this report. He goes on to say, I've interviewed Hollie and will arrange for the transcript to be sent to you. Her speech is indistinct, but she is describing sexual abuse. So again, there's no
yes.
ifs or buts or blurriness about what's going on. It's constantly saying that
Yes.
Hollie is describing
Yes.
sexual abuse. And the other expert was Dr. Eva Harding. That's right,
correct.
isn't it?
Yes, yes, Dr. Eva Harding, yes.
And we've done the same thing here. So we've got the start of her report. She initially classifies herself, I'm a chartered educational and child psychologist of 30 plus years experience and have assessed many people with learning difficulties. I've experienced working with and assessing many children and adults who've survived childhood sexual abuse. So she's obviously a very experienced professional, and she says Hollie was interviewed on 2 occasions, on the 5th and 12th of February 2003, and then Hollie was also interviewed on her own. Let's see where we come up here. This is part of the detail that she has in the report. Now this is difficult for me to read, so you might have to help me on this one, Robert, if you can.
Yes, where are we on?
I think this is about page 3.
Page
having worked with...
oh yes, we can do that, yes.
Having worked with many survivors of...
Yes, I've got, if you would like to read it, are you okay?
If you've got it there.
I'll do it, yes.
I'm struggling.
My glasses are better than yours, obviously,
okay.
Yes. Having worked with many survivors of sexual abuse, I've encountered several cases of multiple abusers and networks of abusers, either within extended families or within rings in the community. Paedophile rings are well known, and so are those targeting the mentally handicapped. With the latter, there is a belief that either they will be unable to tell or will not make credible witnesses. At the age of 6, Hollie had almost no speech. I concluded that Hollie was being truthful and there were multiple abusers. You can perhaps read the rest, Brian.
Sorry, where have we got to? Father was already the first and most persistent, with brother next. So read in the context of these reports, these are reports of, in the expert's opinion, of what was being said.
Yes.
We're going to say we're taking these as an allegation. Father was already the first and most persistent, with brother next. So this is the brother Greg who's being mentioned here. Having primed Hollie for abuse, it will be easy for others to abuse her. Hollie told me she has frequent nightmares about touching, which appear to be like flashbacks, but she does not have these when she is awake. These are common symptoms of abuse. So again, we're getting a very powerful report from this expert, and there's no greyness in it. The reports we're getting out of the police that are coming out of not 1 but 2 psychological experts is that we have a truthful young girl,
yes,
albeit with learning difficulties, but she's telling the truth about what's happened to her, and what's happened to her is abuse.
Of course, and I think again we'll just reiterate that these documents are nothing to do with allegations made by myself or Brian or anybody else. These are official documents that have been used in the course of the case, and all of those documents were put incidentally before Sheriff Principal Edward Bowen, who described said I was despicable what I was doing and I hadn't done any research into the basic facts. Well, think again, Sheriff Principal Bowen, is what I would say.
Right, so just to get this clear, Sheriff Bowen, do you know whether he was medically qualified to be able to interpret these reports?
I have no knowledge that he is medically qualified to interpret those sorts. Whatever he did was on his own volition, as far as I'm aware.
Right. So evidence from an expert witness is put in front of him that,
yes,
that not only have you done your report, but other experts have said quite clearly abuse took place around
absolutely
Hollie, and he simply dismisses it out of hand.
Absolutely. Of course, one has to say all the time, my opinion really isn't really of any great value. I'm just going on exactly on what the experts like Dr. Harding and Dr. Boyle and the others and the police have said. Simple as that. I'm not an expert. You can't really sort of use my evidence. What I've said is, this is the evidence, this is the official evidence, and this is the evidence that the police have effectively ignored.
Right. So we have a situation where a young girl is being abused. She reports it to her mother, Anne. And then what does Anne do as a mother? Anne starts to fight for justice, to get the truth out, until one day she has a group of people who turn up on her doorstep and she's forcibly sectioned.
Yes.
And there's comment actually in Eva's Harding's report on this, which I'll just bring up on screen. Just bear with me, because all of these documents are of sufficient date to be a little difficult to read. So Anne was faced with people turning up at, I believe she was in a flat at that point.
That's correct, yes.
She tried to resist arrest and was something. I'll come down here. But it ended by forcibly being given an injection into her buttocks. She did not know why this had happened until the third day of her incarceration in a psychiatric hospital, when the hospital psychiatrist told her she was being paranoid against her husband. Although she had the support of solicitors and has seen her medical record, she never discovered the reason for this attack on her human rights. Clearly, there had to be a connection with the allegation she was making about Hollie's abuse by her father. The incident also makes the existence of a network of abusers more credible. She was discharged from hospital after 3 days, and we say here that Anne was extremely sensible, because she went to an independent psychiatrist or psychologist, can't remember which, and said, please assess me. And as a result of that, of course, she was given a totally clean bill of health.
Correct.
Now, one of the things that's been extremely important for the UK column is that when I first came and met Anne and Hollie, and indeed yourself, when I was told of this business that Anne had been forcibly sectioned and put into a psychiatric unit, this rang true with me, because I had other mothers who were also talking about the same system being used to shut them up.
Yes.
I'd had Linda Lewis, who had been accused of having Munchausen by proxy, because she was trying to expose that her daughter was ill and needed treatment. And when her daughter was finally taken from her, which was actually in America, the daughter was flown back, 11-year-old girl, flown back to Britain on a false passport, and the girl, who was suffering from multiple ulcers in her stomach, intensely painful, Neath Port Talbot social workers said to the girl, the pain's it's your imagination, and they put the daughter in a psychiatric unit.
Yes.
I've got another mother who, in the last few days, has had a 5-year-old girl taken away from her by Oxfordshire social workers. And basically, what was she trying to do? Protect the girl from abuse. The little girl is reporting, amongst other things, people sticking pins in her. So the focus on mothers and fathers that we are seeing in these child cases throughout the country is that people who stand up to fight to protect their children being branded as mentally ill is a very common feature.
Very much so. And if I can just kind of elaborate a little bit on this particular incident where Anne was taken from her home forcibly on the 5th of September 2000. It occurred 11 days, just 11 days after Hollie had named other members of the group who she claimed had abused her. Right. I don't think there's a coincidence with Hollie going to the police with names and Anne suddenly being forcibly taken from her home.
Right, so the initial accusations were around family members, which you can't comment on, but I'm simply going by these official documents, which are saying that the father and the brother were in the spotlight. But then Hollie goes on and she's naming more people.
Yes.
And at this point, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Anne's branded as being mentally ill.
Exactly, exactly. There is a further document, actually, that I haven't got it with me now, but I've seen it, I can assure it exists, and I've done a little bit of investigation into it. I've seen the document issued by Aberdeen Social Services to justify the sectioning of Anne Greig, or Anne Mackey as she was at the time. Now, this was written by a lady called Sylvia J. Penman. Sylvia J. Penman.
Right.
And within the document, she wrote that obviously the document to section Anne, the warrant, had to be signed by someone in authority. And she said that this document was taken to John Logan, Justice of the Peace, for signature and authorisation. Quite clear in the document. Now, last year, I phoned John Logan, JP, still alive, still in Aberdeen. I wasn't able to speak to him directly, but left a very brief message asking if he recalled in late August of 2000 or early September of 2000, the same year, signing a warrant for the sectioning of a Mrs. Anne Mackey, as she was at that time. He replied when I was out of the house and left a recorded message, and the message that he left was that no, he had not signed any such document. He felt that he probably wasn't authorised to sign such a document, and felt that such a document would need to be signed by a sheriff.
Right.
Now, again, this is public documents going missing.
Right.
There's no sign of this warrant. The Scottish Welfare Commission, who's supposed to have a copy of it, don't have it. The hospital that Anne was taken to don't have a copy to it, and there appears to be no copy on her.
Right. Well, and we can say here to reinforce this that probably before Hillsborough, I think Hillsborough is a very important event from the fact that there's no ifs or buts. Hillsborough has shown the police will absolutely lie when they want to, and they will falsify. So documents going missing, this is just part of the procedure. It's now we are saying it's not incompetence, it's not an accident. We are saying that there is a
conspiracy.
Collaboration.
Conspiracy.
You can say conspiracy or a collaboration whereby these documents are deliberately being pushed to one side.
Absolutely, and that has to be authorised at a very high level. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So,
right. Brian, I've only got 15 minutes.
Okay. All right.
So,
okay.
So
well, let's do.
That affects what you're going to do now.
We've probably got through a lot of it, Brian. We've probably written through a lot of the. I don't know how much support.
Well, let's just keep. If you only got 15 minutes, let's keep going. Yeah. Because
I guess you could add some of the things later, couldn't you?
Well, I can talk about the things at the end. Okay. Sorry, what's this one? Okay. All right. Okay. So if we move on a little bit here, we've got another document. Now this is to do with a doctor's surgery, Dr. Maitland.
Yes.
And in a letter, and this is very personal stuff, but basically he's saying that more recently staff at Beechwood, this is a school.
Yes, I think we need the date. It's 3rd of February 1992.
Right. So this is.
And I think perhaps I should just say that this document and the following document we're going to refer to did not come into Anne's possession until October 2009,
right.
A month after the DC Lisa Evans had interviewed Hollie. I actually not only sent these copies of these documents to Grampian Police, who by that time should have been in the middle of an investigation, but I also contacted the doctor who wrote them, Dr. Paul Carter, to say that these had come into our possession. Right. He felt that they should have been passed on and to the authorities, but they weren't. And he said, well, I suppose the police will contact me now, won't they? And I said, well, yes, they ought to, they should do. Well, I have to say that when the police decided they weren't going to investigate it further, not having questioned a single person, I rang Dr. Carter again, who's a very good man, I have to say, and Dr. Carter said, no, the police didn't contact me as well. And he was very disturbed about the whole thing. Right, okay. So there we are. That's another person who's not been questioned.
In context. I'll just finish the little quote from this letter. More recently, staff at Beechwood have been concerned that when... Staff at Beechwood have been concerned that when Hollie is playing sexually with other children, she shows marked pelvic thrusting, suggesting that she's had some sexual experience. And that would be inappropriate for a girl of her years. The school wrote to Mr. and Mrs. Mackey about this a couple of weeks ago. And your point here is that that letter was never received
and
by Anne
knew nothing
top.
at all. The first time she knew anything about this was in October in 2009. Obviously, had she received that letter, she would have taken action straight away to protect her daughter.
Right, and so we've got now on top of the police, on top of psychiatrists and psychologists, we've now got people actually picking up in a school that something's not right.
Yes.
Yeah. This one is a Grampian Health Board memorandum, which I'm not putting up on any size on screen because of what it contains, but I'll just take this section from it. It ends, obviously she's an at-risk child because of her learning difficulties. So school doctor is putting things in context and admitting that Hollie, by nature of the fact that she's Down syndrome, is of additional risk and vulnerability.
In fact, if I may just add, that was Dr. Carter again who wrote that particular assessment. And when I spoke to him about it, he explained that he left Scotland shortly after the 1992 letter. And he, of course, assumed, having done his job, had passed it on and assumed that the police and other people were taking appropriate action.
Right.
He was shocked when I told him that nothing had happened and that obviously Hollie's mother knew nothing about these letters.
Yeah. No, you did get, and Anne had support from the Down Syndrome Association. This is we've got a couple of letters that they wrote on the subject. So this is the first one, dated the 15th September 05. I think I should be able to expand a bit of that. No, I haven't actually. Sorry. Okay. What it says, I'll read it because the text will be small for viewers. I believe it would help Mrs. Mackey if you would provide some explanation as to why a judicial review is not possible in Hollie's case. Also, I was most concerned by the police evidence given at the hearing, as described to me by Mrs. Mackey, which was inaccurate and unfounded as well as being insulted, and I'm surprised that no follow-up action is possible. And what's beginning to come to the surface here is that the Down Syndrome Association was also beginning to pick up that things were not right about the investigation of this case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the second one, dated the 8th of January 2009. Hollie is 29 and has Down syndrome. She's also been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as the result of sexual abuse. So there is absolutely no doubt in the documentation that we are looking at the moment, and we are sharing excerpts. We just don't think it's fair for thing, but nowhere in these documents are we reading any doubt as to the fact that Hollie is a truthful witness who is accurately describing what happened to her.
And describing the identities of those who abused her.
Describe the identity of those who abused her, and we now know for a fact, because your court case has revealed it, that basically the police, contrary to their smokescreen statements, did not interview any of the key people identified as abusers.
That is correct, and I think I should add to that that obviously during the course of the investigations and through various letters through the Secretary of State for Scotland, Mr Michael Moore, the current Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland QC considers that this has been a thorough investigation has been conducted on the basis of the 8th of September 2009 evidence and expert witness evidence. And so has the Justice Secretary, Mr Kenny McCaskill, who famously, of course, told the world that Mr El Megrahi was going to die within 3 months. Okay, well, Robert, I know you've got to leave us because you've got quite a bit of travelling to do. I've got some other points which I'm going to share with the audience. Thank you.
But at this point, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us, and well done for all of your tremendous work. And I'm very pleased that UK Column is here supporting you, and will continue to support Robert Green and Anne and Hollie Greig.
Well, that's very kind.
You've just seen there some of the evidence showing that Hollie Greig was abused, and key to this, of course, is that not one police officer but several police officers are giving their opinion that this young girl was abused. So here is real evidence being put on the table. This is just some of the evidence that was put in front of not only the police but local authorities, social services, in the effort to get justice for Hollie Greig and her mother. And of course, what happened? Did the police and local authorities and the public sector spend money on a full and proper investigation into this young girl's abuse? No, they did the absolute opposite, which was to spend a minimum of £500,000 in trying to silence Robert Green and others who were speaking out about this terrible abuse case. What happened with the BBC? As we go into the next part, we're now going to have a look in a little bit of detail about the reaction of the BBC in Scotland to the Hollie abuse case. And of course, we can now review what was and what was not done by the BBC in Scotland then against the background of what has happened in the Newsnight cover-up of Jimmy Savile. I think you will be extremely interested to hear what Robert had to say earlier today. 2, 1. So Robert, we've talked through the evidence for the fact that Hollie Greig was abused, and of course the police are saying this and other professionals. What happened with the wider media? Because I know that the BBC got in contact with you, or yes, you got in contact with the BBC. Yes. What actually happened?
Yes, they got in contact with me, and this is as a result of the very first mainstream media reporting on Hollie's case, which took place on the 19th of April 2009. And it was reported in the Scottish edition of the News of the World, the journalist being James Mulholland. Now, after that story had come up, I was contacted pretty quickly by the BBC and by Mark Daly, who made the comment that the BBC were interested in doing programmes about paedophile attacks on children and the disabled in Scotland, and particularly concentrating on the disabled, because he claimed that they had evidence that a lot of disabled people were being exposed to this time of crime in Scotland, and the BBC were very keen to do an extensive documentary on this Hollie's case and cases like it that they knew were taking place in Scotland.
Right. Okay. Now, I know that you've made a statement
yes,
about your present relationship with Anne and Hollie Greig and the campaign. I think that's a very important one, because you also bring into it the BBC. I've got it on screen here, so if you'll allow me, I'll just read it out, and of course you know it very well.
Yes.
And so what you say in your statement: although I no longer represent Anne and Hollie Greig, and have not done so for a long time, as they have their own legal team now, as appropriate, I remain committed as a private citizen with extensive knowledge of Hollie's case and those related to it, to do everything I can within the correct framework to press for a full inquiry, not only in Hollie's case, but also in the wider public interest, given the recent horrific exposures of similar cases coming into the spotlight. In particular, the conduct of the BBC comes into question again with its links to covering up the conduct of Jimmy Savile, and BBC Scotland's behaviour, primarily by reporter Mark Daly, who suddenly was forced to drop Hollie's case after confirming a clear intention to broadcast. I'm just going to call up Mark Daly's picture, and then what can you tell us about Mr. Daly then, and what occurred?
Yes, well, after he approached me, he said that he would, one of the conditions for BBC wanting to do the story was that they had an exclusive. They didn't want any other media outlet, the News of the World or that particular group involved, no one. They wanted to do it as an exclusive. Of course, Anne Greig's decision would be final on this, but I talked about it over with Anne, and we agreed that the BBC was probably the best vehicle to actually expose it and to bring it into the public domain. As Mark Daly had stressed continually, he said, oh, well, I think we're the best ones, you can deal with who you want, but if we do it, and it has to be an exclusive, we think it will be the very best way of doing it, and we think you'll be very pleased with what we do at the end of the day, of the result. So on that basis, we decided that we would decline approaches from other media organisations, which I had quite a number as a result of the News of the World one, and allow the BBC to handle this exclusively. There are some emails between Mark Daly and myself in which Mr. Daly makes it quite clear that having received all the documentation, which obviously quite clearly, without any shadow of a doubt, from the medical psychological, police witnesses, Down syndrome, but there was not the slightest doubt that Hollie had been sexually abused over a period of time.
Okay, Robert, I'll just call, I've got a couple of those emails which we can call up on screen so that people know that we're dealing with factual evidence. So this one is dated Saturday the 25th of April 2009 at 10:51. And what Mark Daly is saying to you is, I received the documents this morning and have read most of them. I will bring them into the office on Monday and discuss it with my boss. As far as I am concerned, I am making a program about this. I need to have it signed off by management, of course, but I'm confident that it will happen. Please keep me appraised of any press, TV or otherwise you plan to do. It is, of course, my preference you do none, but I understand Anne needs to pay the bills. I feel I can really do something with this story and would view a confrontation with the alleged abusers a priority. I will talk to you on Monday. And then the other one that we've got here, 27th of April at 17:24. Great news. I'll be sure to call here tomorrow. At the moment, it's going to be a BBC Scotland commission for both TV and radio. However, I fully expect it to make national news at the time of broadcast and potentially a panorama. But for the moment, we press ahead with the BBC Scotland Commission for a 30-minute investigation to be broadcast sometime in the late summer. So this man is not only keen on this programme, in these emails, he's obviously committed that the story is real, the evidence has obviously been checked, and he's saying he's going to go ahead with it.
Well, that's correct. He's going on exactly the same, for the same reason that I dealt with the case in the first place. It wasn't to do with what Hollie or Anne or anyone else had to say. I had to rely on documentary evidence, and I felt that documentary evidence was strong enough to justify a full investigation. And quite clearly, the police had failed to, in my opinion, to act in accordance with their duties to protect the public.
Right. So what actually happened then? We got to this stage where BBC Scotland was adamant they were going to go ahead with it. What then happened?
Right. Well, for a period of time, I was dealing. Mark Daly was away for I think 2 or 3 weeks within this period. In fairness, but I was dealing regularly with Cathy Long, who's from BBC Radio Scotland. And the arrangement was that in early June, Mark Daly, along with Cathy Long and with Liam McDougall from Panorama, because you've probably seen that Panorama was expected to be a programme on a national basis rather than just a Scottish basis. Yes. We're going to come and have an interview with Anne and Hollie and myself. And this was arranged for the 4th of July, sorry, not the 4th of July, the 4th of June 2009. And the 3 reporters came from Scotland to Anne and Hollie's home in Shropshire, and we had a 5.5-hour discussion. At the end of the discussion, it seemed to go very well. Mark Daly was extremely, I have to say, extremely nice and pleasant to both Anne and especially to Hollie. And we had a good discussion. And the 3 reporters left saying that the next thing we would hear would be for filming to take place in late, they thought would probably be in August or early September, and from then on everything would go ahead for a program to come out, a documentary, and that was how it was left at that time. Right.
And then what happened next?
Well, the next thing that happened was that both Anne and I got a phone call on the 10th of June 2009 from Mark Daly saying that the project was off, they could no longer make a program. I asked him why that would be, after all the, obviously, comments that he'd made and the conviction that everything was going to go ahead and the fact he'd seen all the relevant documents to supporting this. And he said that if he and the other 2 went ahead, they would lose their jobs.
They just so we're absolutely clear on that, and
yes,
I'm checking what I'm hearing is correct.
Yes.
He's something about losing jobs. Just say that bit again.
Yes. That if they went ahead, they would lose their jobs.
Right. So that is clearly saying.
Yes, in a separate conversation. Obviously, I spoke to Anne as well, and in a separate conversation, he said much the same thing to her as well. I understand.
Right. So that is clearly saying that they were being put under pressure, if not threatened,
Yes.
To shut the programme down. This is very, very similar to what we're hearing about Jimmy Savile, isn't it, in Newsnight?
Very much so, which is why I brought the matter up, because of the Savile case. This is not the first time. What I did following that was to write to Mark Thompson, who is the Director General, who is obviously embroiled in some controversy over the Savile case at the moment. And I asked him who it was who would threaten these journalists. I also followed up by writing to Sir Michael Lyons, who was then the head of the BBC Trust, and asked him the very same question. After a long delay, both of them wrote back to me saying that I had to refer it to the complaints department. I wrote back to them and made it quite clear, I'm not going to the complaints department, I'm asking you. This is a very, very serious issue involving our publicly funded main broadcaster in the UK. It seems quite clear that an attempt has been made to stop a very, very important article that might have protected many, many people, many vulnerable people from suffering horrendous ordeals. And I wanted to know exactly who had threatened those journalists.
Yeah. And the response here seems to me to reflect this very casual attitude of the BBC when they were dealing with Jimmy Savile and reports were coming in about what this man was doing.
Yes,
it's a fob off. It's a casual, dismissive attitude.
Yes.
Right. And you got some correspondence, didn't you, finally back from the BBC, which was basically dropping the case?
Yes, I did, yes.
And I've got a letter, well, the front page of a key letter, which I'll just bring up on screen. Mm-hmm. This was dated the 10th of June 2009.
Yes.
And it's actually saying that we're convinced that Hollie was indeed abused, and we do not dispute the police and professional evidence of what happened to her. There was a couple of words missing out of the sentence. But
yes.
This is the key thing: is that the BBC was saying that they were convinced as to what had happened.
Yes.
But despite that, we're going to drop the programme.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Robert, just to sum up, thank you very much for giving us that. What is your feeling on the BBC and how you've been treated? And how Hollie's been treated in this case?
It is not so much the way that I've been treated, that is not of great importance. It is the way that Hollie Greig has been treated, and the BBC's attitude to serious sexual crimes against children and the disabled. And I think we're seeing this, a consistent thread throughout with the BBC, with the Jimmy Savile case, and possibly even other issues that we don't even know about. Because obviously with the Savile case coming up, it's brought this very much into the public domain. But who knows how many other cases they may have dropped, like a Hollie Greig, that nobody knows about. I can't say, but it would seem to be consistent with the way that they are operating at the moment.
And I think we should say it, because the letter is there for people to see on screen, that
yes.
the BBC is trying now to undermine the case. On the 10th of June, it's trying to undermine the case by saying that that Anne had some mental health issues, when the reality is that Anne was put in a psychiatric unit to try and shut her up and stop her defending her daughter, which is exactly what's happened in the recent case with a lady called Holly Barker.
Yes. In fact, this is the case, and in fact, I have to say it's worse than that as far as the BBC are concerned, because we had sent the BBC the covering expert letters from Dr. Ellen Smith, actually exonerate, well, not the word isn't exonerating, but clearing Anne of any serious mental problems at all. So they were just going on the particular attempt on the 5th of September 2000 to actually take Anne into a mental institution just 11 days, and this is very significant, after Hollie had named the other members of the gang who raped her, which includes some very prominent people in the Aberdeen area.
Yeah, and this brings us on to a topic which we won't go through with you, but in talking in general about child
yes.
abuse and the way the so-called care system works, the UK column is pointing out that case after case, we have mums and dads pointing out that when they tried to defend their child, they were actually accused of being mentally ill or requested yes. to undergo psychiatric or clinical psychology investigations, when yes. the onus then switched so that the parent trying to protect the child becomes the one who has problems. And in in many cases, we're seeing children then being given to the full-time care of the abusive partner.
Yes.
So it's a total twist.
It is, and I mean, I think the alarming thing, and I think people are rapidly beginning to realise this, because paedophile crime is not something that people want to listen to. It is so horrible that nobody really wants to think about it, but we have to protect our children. And this behaviour, isn't it exactly like we might have witnessed in Nazi Germany or in Stalin's Soviet Union? And it's happening to our country today.
It's happening in our country, and unless many people in this country wake up, children will not even be ours, because the movement in Ireland at the moment is that the state has primary control of children, and the same policy is coming into UK very quickly. Robert, thank you very much for giving us that interview. It's been very, very enlightening, very shocking, and once again the spotlight firmly put back on the BBC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Welcome back to UK Column Live, and I think you'll agree that's an incredible interview with Robert, both looking at the evidence but also hearing how the BBC lined up to do a full documentary on the abuse of Hollie Greig. They believed her story, they believed the evidence that was put forward to them, and then we're once again hearing that powerful figures in the BBC bullied or threatened employees to pull the investigation. It happened for Hollie Greig, and indeed, of course, it's happened with Newsnight for Jimmy Savile. The pattern north and south of the border is the same. The BBC is failing to get to grips with these paedophile rings. It's very interesting that there's been a sustained internet campaign over the past few months to try and undermine Hollie Greig's campaign for justice. And we are aware that some members associated with the campaign of attack and undermining of Hollie Greig are themselves or were themselves connected with the BBC. So I leave you to ponder on that, but something is wrong at the heart of the BBC and we need to deal with it. I'll just remind you that it's not only Anne Greig that's been subjected to forcible incarceration in a psychiatric unit for trying to protect her daughter. It's also recently happened to the lady Holly Barker, who was sectioned and is still being held in Warnford Hospital, Oxford. Her crime is to try and protect her own daughter from the abuse of other adults. At the moment, we have no contact with this lady, and we believe that she's been forcibly sectioned. So welcome to Britain to 2012. Being forcibly sectioned and drugged. Sorry, I was just corrected there. But the key thing is that she's still in hospital. She's still being held against her wishes. No friends are allowed to make contact with her, and she's denied access to her relatives who are based in South Africa. What we're going to do with 8 minutes on the clock is just a very quick look through some of our political figures where there are questions to be asked, and then I'm going to hand back over to Patrick for a sort of summing up on what we've been talking about. This is the remains of the letter from Tom Watson to David Cameron. Please visit Mr. Watson's personal website where you can read it for yourself. But basically, he's giving David Cameron praise for swift action, but saying in his own experience it's too easy for the establishment to cover up. And he's also pointing out that since sharing his concerns with you at Prime Minister's Questions, a number of people have come forward to say they've raised their suspicions with the police, but investigations were not carried out. That, of course, is the substance, absolutely, with Hollie Greig. They believed Hollie's story of the abuse, but then the police did not investigate. And Mr. Watson is now finding that more people are coming forward, and he's saying one allegation involves alleged child abuse with a former cabinet minister. I'll just let this scroll through quickly, but he's talking about concerted establishment cover-ups, and he's saying that a dedicated police unit to look into the thing on the big scale is very important. He's saying, I know that you want to give this your urgent attention. Well, I think Mr. Tom Watson has more faith in David Cameron than I do, but he's also pointing out quite correctly that Mr. Cameron has no choice, because this paedophile subject has now broken right into the heart of Westminster. Can we trust our politicians? Well, Harriet Harman is a key figure who's been in the press many times before, but as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, this lady has been connected with the National Council for Civil Liberties, now known as the organisation Liberty, under Chief Executive Shami Chakrabarti. And of course, the key point is that the National Council for Civil Liberties was supporting the paedophile information exchange and paedophile action for liberty. So we have a lady who has been intimately connected with a pro-paedophile organisation coming into mainstream government. It's quite shocking, but maybe a picture is beginning to build. The Telegraph reporting in very blunt terms here, saying how Hattie's friends defended paedophilia. Remember, we're talking about a British senior politician. Of course, this lady was even more involved because she was working with NCCL at an earlier stage, and she was there from 1974 to 83, and what the article from The Guardian is pointing out, this covered the notorious 1976 submission, where Civil Liberties was saying that childhood sexual experiences willingly engaged in with an adult result in no identifiable damage. The real need is a change in attitude which assumes that cases of paedophilia result in lasting damage. So this is pro-paedophilic language, this is pro-paedophiles, and we have senior government ministers connected with it. This was a later statement in 77, where the NCCL was asked for their policy on the paedophile information exchange, and that they said they didn't really have a comment other than the evidence that children are harmed if after a mutual relationship. So basically, this is acceptance of paedophile activity by condoning, really. We're not saying that this gentleman has done anything wrong, and certainly not in the serious subject that we are talking about today. We are simply pointing out that this is the standard to which our MPs have now sunk. So we have MP Chris Bryant advertising himself on a website. And I think this picture must surely shock many mothers and fathers across the country and other upstanding individuals. Is this really the level to which our MPs have been reduced? Of course, this gentleman is also a common purpose leader. And here, Minister for Children and Families, what's this gentleman been up to? Well, of course, he was removed from post at one stage for fiddling. That's the Westminster technique for, what's the correct term? Fiddling. Theft of expenses. Of course, it was called fiddling, so at the moment this gentleman's back in post, but connected with families. And what is happening in the background, we're now seeing politicians suggesting that the public authorities involved in childcare should actually have even greater control in the lives of children, although we know children are being taken from so-called care homes to be handed to paedophile rings. Front page of the column, Eilish Angelini, who was earlier working on a report under Operation Planet, which resulted in the Scottish Crown Office effectively sanctioning particular criminal acts contrary to law, in particular teenage boys being sodomised by older men. Now, we are not the only people pointing this out. We have a QC from Scotland, Jock Thompson, who's calling the system north of the border institutionally corrupt. We should all be very afraid our system of criminal justice is rapidly going to hell. I'm going to stop there because you've got 3 minutes to tell us what you think we should be doing. How do you summarise it?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you can get that on screen or not, Brian, but the article from the Daily Mail today was a really interesting story about a government scientist who worked for DEFRA, who has just been convicted of sexual abuse of two young girls, and they were incidents that happened some 20 years ago. Now, he was identified very, very late in the day, only recently, and so here we have this situation where these girls were abused years ago, and they identified their abuser recently. It's gone to trial, and he has been sentenced in Exeter Crown Court.
So it can be done.
It can be done. What is the difference between this and then the Waterhouse inquiry, where multiple identifications were made by the boys from the boys' home in North Wales, but yet no convictions were made? And could it be that this government scientist today is too low on the food chain to have the sort of protection that's afforded by some of the top powerful politicians?
Right. We've got 1 minute to go, so I'm going to say I think this is exactly the point. We know from what the police are telling us, we know what other mainstream journalists are telling us, that these paedophile rings go to the heart of the British establishment, very big money and power involved, and the usual sacrifice is somebody at the bottom end of the food chain. I've got to remind viewers that roughly 50% of paedophiles are women, slightly more, 52% are thereabout men, but also including women, but we only see these men. I think we need another programme looking at Parliament and what is really being done or not being done with these investigations, if you're happy to join us.
Definitely.
So I'm going to end there. Thank you for joining UK Column Live today. A very serious subject. Please spread the information with your friends. If we want to stop it, we have to expose it. So keep digging, keep talking, keep watching UK Column Live. Thank you for joining us.